Good evening, everybody. This is Patrick from the Poison Pen Bookstore, and we're here with another of our virtual events this evening. And today we have our good friend Michael Carita writing as Scott Carson with his brand new book, Where They Wait, right here. And also Richard Chizmar, who did a great event for us earlier this year, a couple months ago, I think, for his sui generis, how would you say that, without genre, book, Chasing the Boogeyman. And we still have a couple of copies left with signed book plates here. And I'll put links to both of these books in the comments field. But if you have questions for Michael / Scott or Richard, go ahead and put them in and I'll be happy to ask anything. So anyway, I'll hand it over to you, Barbara, for the moment.
Thank you very much, Patrick. So I'm raising a glass to you, Michael. Congratulations on publication day.
Thank you. Thanks for putting up with me again.
Yep, BYOB, that's the name of these events, right? I mean,
Right.
I know a lot of people had like Zoom cocktail parties, which I could never get into, but I think that if we're, toasting.
As long as we're talking books, why not?
Yeah, absolutely true. So it's a book birthday. Michael, I really like the cover of this book. I think the typeface is just terrific.
Yeah, I love it. The font that they've used on the paperback of The Chill and on the hardcover of Where They Wait, I think it's classic horror, but just has a nice, beautiful look to it.
It does. And it's quite edgy and contemporary as well as classic horror. So I like that a lot. And Richard, I don't know if I ever told you, because I'm not sure we had them when we spoke to you. I think Chasing the Boogeyman is not only a great title, but has a great cover. And, it was on the bestseller list for ages. Were you surprised by that?
Yes. I was pleasantly surprised that that more than my immediate family and friends read and liked the book. So yeah, I'm very grateful and surprised.
Oh, congratulations to you.
Yeah, congratulations.
With my eye watering. None of us know why I have a black eye. Was it a puppy? Was it Rob? I can't blame either Michael or Richard. I don't think it's really a black eye. I'm just going to drink. So I'll tell you what, Richard, I am just going to sit back and drink. But I did want to say that Michael's move to Maine has really done wonders for Michael's conception of books, because this wonderful book takes place in Maine, and I don't think it could really take place anywhere else. So I'm happy that you've left Florida for the frozen north.
Thank you. Sometimes I need the backup vote. When we start having the sunset at 4 o'clock, I need the reassurance.
Well, if you lived in Phoenix, you'd be thrilled to see sunset at 4 o'clock because it's getting cooler. Right. This is my favorite time of year as we're moving along towards the winter solstice. When Dana Stabenow comes down from Alaska and stays with us over the holidays, she can't wait for December 21st because, as she said, that's when we start gaining daylight in Alaska. And I'm going, that's the worst day of the year for us, because that's the year we start gaining daylight in Phoenix. So anyway, to you in Maine. Richard, I'm sure you have fabulous questions for Michael, so I'll just sit here and drink and let you take over.
Absolutely. First and foremost, happy publication day, Michael.
Thank you. Appreciate you giving up some time in the evening here.
Oh, anytime. I wanted to ask you if does this get old for you, publication day? Do you celebrate? Or is it just another day in the office?
Today was just another day in the office. Ordinarily back in pre-COVID times, I would be traveling. So the book release was always, usually I would be physically at the Poison Pen. So,
right.
I would be celebrating. I'm doing an in-person event in Bloomington for this one, which feels kind of like oddly exciting to me. It used to be old hat, and now I'm wondering if I still will be able to interact with the humans. So today was just a day at the office, which is, admittedly maybe not the best way to celebrate, but it's also, I'm writing because I enjoy it. So
it's part of the job, right? So I want to get this out of the way right away. I know you've answered this question many times, but let's get the elephant in the room. So why Scott Carson?
Why Scott Carson? Yeah, you would think I would have a better, more pat answer. It's kind of two faceted. On one level, I've always wanted to do a pseudonym, but I wanted the real deal pseudonym that no one knew about, other than, I don't even know, I might have told my wife to avoid a real crisis, but I love the idea of giving people I know a book and saying, tell me what you think about this guy's work, and just seeing the unfiltered response. And then on the other hand, it had been maybe 10 years since I last wrote in the supernatural genre when The Chill came out. And it just seemed like, okay, let's try to create a nice, clear, these books will be on the supernatural, more horror side, and then the Carita books will be crime novels. And that way I can tell the reader who says, but I don't like these, well, then just buy On Brand or buy both.
Right. That's good. A funny aside, I'll tell you one of my secrets real quick. I've always wanted to have a number of writers combine to form a pseudonym. And I wanted to publish them in Cemetery Dance magazine several times. And then I wanted to publish a book by this person. And I've actually talked to a number of very well-known writers about doing that, but it's never came to fruition. So
I'm
I
sure
always thought that would be
loves-
so much fun.
Yes, absolutely. I was going to say, you won't have trouble finding people.
The problem is now, if we do it, they'll be like, who is John Henry and why, where did he come from? And I remember the Poison Pen, podcast, but
Yeah,
so
we're giving it away.
I was talking to my son today because I showed him a copy of your book and I told him he needed to start with The Chill. And I said, he had watched the, what's the Angelina Jolie movie, Those Who Wish Me
Those Wish
Dead?
Me Dead.
Yeah, which I really enjoyed. And he had watched that with me. So I talked about you and how you've kindly invited me up to Maine, which I need to get off my rear end and do one day, and stop being a recluse. But so I was telling him about the books, and I said, they both have this very real sense of creeping dread. It's a slow burn, but it's also, in your face, horror when it comes. And I was explaining the differences, and I said The Chill's, much kind of an atmospheric disaster ghost story. And I said, this one's, very different. So where, I'm not going to say where did your idea come from, but was the story, well, you know what? Yes, I will. I'll just keep it simple.
It's really, it's
cliche, Richard.
it's a
Just
product,
Yeah, what the hell? What the hell?
product of pandemic paranoia, I guess. I wrote this one. This was the only book that I wrote fully in lockdown. In that stretch of I finished Never Far Away kind of in the very first weeks, but this one was conceived and written during lockdown. And I remember reading about the subscription numbers on mindfulness apps were just going nuts, and it makes sense. Everyone's stressed out, so they're looking for the thing that helps fix that. But then, do you really want to turn your brain over to your phone? I mean, I feel like we all have enough healthy kind of technophobe in us anyhow. And then there was a quote in, I want to say it was the New York Times, it might've been the Wall Street Journal, where it was an investor, but he referred to Calm as being the Nike of the mind.
Ooh.
And I'm sure it's something that if you're buying stock, you want to hear. But as a human, I thought, that is terrifying. The Nike of the mind is just, nice and terrifying. So I started to play with it a little bit, and I sort of merged it into an idea that I'd had before and just discarded because it felt too familiar, which was, imagine the same thing, Clarity, the app in the book, but as a pill, And then I thought, we've seen that. So I kind of had toyed around with that idea and just dropped it. And some of the same elements came to fruition in the book, but for the most part, I wanted that sort of claustrophobic dread. I love small town. We talked about this with Chasing the Boogeyman. The small town story is so unique in its ability to terrify because it is so intimate.
Yes.
And there's something about a community where everyone knows everyone else, and they also know a little bit more about you than you think they do, certainly, but maybe they know things that you aren't even aware of, family stories, things like that. So I was just in the mood for good small town dread, I guess, at that cheerful point in life.
Well, you know what? I was probably remiss not to ask you, because maybe some viewers, have no idea what the book is about. So what would be your semi-quick, synopsis of the book for readers who are interested?
Okay, this one I can do now. Imagine that you have a mindfulness app that wants to take over your life, and possibly end it. And that cheerful sales pitch is about as good as it gets, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I was going to say, for someone like me, I'm a techno dinosaur. So the Clarity app is like particularly terrifying to me. And you're talking about like mindful apps and all that. And I don't even, other than glancing at my, my phone app page, app store, whatever the heck it's called, to buy some new music or something, I'm pretty clueless. But yeah,
So you're protected now, though.
well, maybe not after reading your books, because now, I've got a little bit of an itch to, are you into all the modern technology and the apps and all that?
Oh no, I'm terrified of all things tech.
Okay. So this was really stretch.
Yeah, this one actually was pretty easy to land for me. And in all honesty, I look at the idea of an app that sends like a tone that is supposed to affect the way your brain works. We're going to soothe your mind by playing some kind of specific tone. And I think about all of the amounts of research being done toward real therapy and this experimental stuff that we're very happy to just like grab onto. And it obviously is doing something to your brain. I mean, we understand that the brain reacts to sound, the brain reacts to song, memory is influenced by these things. We know that. So the idea of just trusting an app from some, I immediately pictured Zuckerberg, of course. It's like, I picture the 19-year-old guy in his dorm room who's like, what happens if I push this button, pull this wire? And it seems all too plausible to me that you would have something problematic out of that. But that comes from, as I said, it's my very natural paranoia with anything tech related. I think it's the idea of sort of being curious about what you can do with someone else's mind. I mean, that's what you and I are doing every day. We're trying to hit those buttons.
Right.
So why would someone else not try in a similar or in a different medium?
Right. It's funny because
I'm going to intervene
Barbara.
for a minute, because I am, I don't even do social media. I only do it one for the bookstore. But I will tell you that that there are apps that nag you. I actually have an app called Duolingo for learning a language, because I thought during, all this time, maybe I should learn Latin, which I had managed to skip somehow with all the other languages that I studied. And it truly nags you. And, if you've been watching all the stuff going on about Facebook and so forth and Instagram, you can see how really addictive these things are in real life. I mean, not just you making up this Clarity app, but especially for teenagers, it's lethal. And it'll be really interesting to see whether there's any kind of reining in that can go on. But Michael, one of the things I've always thought was so interesting about your supernatural books is they start out so plausibly. They don't start out scary, when you first read this book, the guy's going up to Maine and he's going to write for his college newspaper because his career hasn't panned out the way he wants it to. And, his friend that he succeeds in nagging him or bribing him, or however you want to look at it, to come up there. And I mean, it doesn't start out scary.
Yeah,
and I think that's true of all your books, whether, when you've been writing in the supernatural. I think that's why they have so much power, because you just sort of walk into it and then gradually.
I think what you're talking about is the exact reason that I respond to these types of books as a reader, which is I'm a skeptic. So the supernatural horror that just jumps right out of the gate, it never worked for me. Like, you needed to sell me on that world. So it was the grounded world that I knew and the character that I could relate to. And then I'm just hooked into the character story. And then you layer in, those supernatural things. So, I mean, even with thinking of Stephen King, my favorite of his books are going to be generally the books that people would call his slow burn stuff. I mean, I love Bag of Bones, for example. I don't know how long you go in Bag of Bones before there's the first true supernatural event. He has some dreams, and they're playing with the refrigerator magnets. Yeah. But in terms of the first true, the bell rings.
Oh, the moose's bell. Yeah.
The moose, Bunter's bell. Yes. Bunter's bell is ringing. And it's this just great slow creep. And obviously, I mean, King's a great example of that, but those are the stories that as a reader, I always gravitate to. And if you bring in a ghost right out of the gate, I'm not saying there aren't exceptions to it, but for the most part, I want to be able to believe that this is the world that I know. Otherwise, the supernatural doesn't work.
You know, I'm the same way. And you mentioned Steve King, and it made me think of Salem's Lot right away, where, you know, what was it, his second book? And, you know, you get to know Ben and Susan, you get to know the entire town before the vampire kind of sweeps in. And by then you already care about everyone, you're invested. And it
Right.
makes it that much more of an interesting and scary dynamic. And you believe, at least I did. Whereas, yeah, there's some books you pick up and the vampire's in chapter 2, and I'm like you, I'm kind of a skeptic, and I'm, you know, giving it the side eye and
Yeah, I think the writer needs to earn your suspension of disbelief. If you come to the page just assuming the reader is all in on this type of story, for me, it usually doesn't work.
Well, what Barbara just said made me think of the blurb that is on the back of this book from myself. And it says, it hums with creeping dread and mounting horror, smart, scary, and the final act is like that last downhill plunge on a roller coaster. Terrifying, exhilarating, and unforgettable. And that for me, both the chill and Where They Wait, you know, is in that same mold where it is, you know, it builds and it builds and it builds. And then you get to that final act and it's chaos. And by then you know, even if you don't want to read anymore because you're scared, you're stuck, you're going, you know, you're trapped. So yeah, well done. And I'm with you. I still remember an early review, the reviewer said, you know, you can tell Chizmar doesn't quite buy into the supernatural stuff quite yet. And it was mostly true, but it was also what you said. I needed to have that believable world, you know, formed first and then it introduced. So
right. It's you need to get to know I'm thinking of like Something Wicked This Way Comes, where there's something immediately creepy about the guy who is selling lightning rods, but he's not overtly a demon out of the gate. You know, we don't have some sort of entity fear of him. It's that entry point. Promise me this will be a little bit weird and then just get back to the characters.
Exactly. So the young tech genius, and you just mentioned this in the book. His name is Bryce Lerman. Is that
Lerman.
Lerman. So you said he was inspired a little bit by Zuckerman and these other.
Yeah, I mean, I think Zuckerberg is such an easy villain that I kind of, you know, don't want to say I'm thinking too directly of him. But the thing with Bryce is he's playing a role. So this is a little bit of a spoiler, but I viewed him as he's not really that guy. You know, he's not that gifted guy. He's trying to sell himself sort of in the mold. And so it was either like style him up a little bit more like Zuckerberg or have him, you know, in the black turtleneck, the Steve Jobs thing. But I wanted him to fit the type so easily that our narrator feels kind of lazy for assuming that he just is another one of these tech guys. And
Right.
he's missing the real, you know, the layer beneath the story there. Although I kind of have had my mind stuck on something Barbara brought up a few minutes ago with the recent release of information on Facebook. I was reading a story today, which should not be surprising at all, but it is fascinating to think the algorithm rated anger 5 times higher than just a simple like. So the angry face was more desirable. And then it's obviously this self-fulfilling prophecy of you get more rage, you're going to get more content that generates more angry responses. And then you look at where we've kind of ended up with social media and you realize it's not an accident at all. This is literally by design. I mean, you have, you know, a very intense calculus that went into this, and trying to get that kind of world and just take it down to a micro story that I felt I could resolve for the reader actually probably helped me wrestle with my own feelings about Facebook and Twitter and just all of the interconnected existence we have now. So, you know, I can kind of put a bow on it in mind.
There's a whole thing there. It's so Machiavellian if you really think about it. You know, power corrupting and absolute power corrupting absolutely. I mean, Zuckerberg didn't, you know, started out with this kind of utopian idea for Facebook, you know, that it was going to be one thing. And clearly it has turned into another. It may be like Frankenstein, where he made the monster and can't control it, or, you know, it may be, and you know, I think what Lerman to me reminds me of that, you know, I mean, that these guys, I don't know if you ever watched Foyle's War, but there's a wonderful moment in one of the last ones where the atomic bomb goes off the testing site, you know, in New Mexico. And you recognize that there was never any way that the guys that made the bomb weren't going to test it at least once.
Right.
There was no way that they were going to create this thing and not try it.
That's a great example, actually. And then there's always the belief that once I understand how it works, I'll be able to put it back.
Right.
Model. You know, once I won't have a problem doing that. And it never pans out exactly that way.
How long have we been saying that?
Exactly. Yes. I
You
mean,
know?
we're always going to dial back on it.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because the older generations are very vocal about the perils of Snapchat and TikTok and a lot of these apps that prey on youth. But we're the ones on Facebook, and we're the ones on a lot of these, you know, more antiquated social media. You know,
I think kids always have a healthier skepticism. The problem is, you know, can you build something that takes that away? But I agree with you. I think the average age of the Facebook user now is, I mean, kids are not using Facebook. Teens are not on Facebook.
Not actively. Yeah. Some of them
Not
have a page,
actively,
but
right.
yeah, they almost have it as a badge of like dishonor that, you know, I haven't updated that in 3 years. I had it when I was 12,
Right.
but yeah, it's just
I've
interesting.
never been on it, so it's a whole world that is completely foreign to me. I made a decision a long time ago that I was not going to do social media personally. So, you know, I'm indifferent to, I mean, every once in a while, one of my staff will say, you know, we got a bad review on Yelp for something or other. I'm going, so, you know, I mean, I don't care. I'm never going to see it. Doesn't matter to me. I do think, I mean, we're making our own little step forward here by using YouTube now as a simultaneous streaming channel, partly because, you know, it renders you safer if one of the platforms goes down and you can't use it, which happened with Facebook. But I also think that there are going to be a lot of people who are going to turn away from Facebook as a platform and need somewhere else to go. So it's a practical decision. And, you know, Instagram is owned by Facebook, so you have to be careful there. I don't want to have a store on Instagram and Facebook. I mean, for among other things, we can't actually, I know you won't believe this, and it's a ridiculous thing to say, we can't actually do any more business than we have right now. I mean, we just can't.
Yeah.
We are over our heads. So I don't need to be encouraging more, but even if we did,
Edit that
I
out
wouldn't
later.
feel good about that.
Right. Yeah. Michael, do you have a preference from all the different social media of which ones you feel are most valuable to you as a writer? Or?
You know, I don't use them personally. So
Okay.
I have a Facebook page. I feel like that's where most of the readers are, but I'm hiring someone to handle that. It never worked well for me as a writer. I mean, I'm on, if it comes on Twitter, it's actually me. Like, those would be my words, because I saw Twitter as a place where careers went to die. It was like, so my film agent made a comment to me, this is probably 8 years ago now, that just really stuck with me. She said, I've never had a writer get a job on Twitter, but I've had some lose jobs because of Twitter. And I thought, okay, that's actually, you know, that's an interesting thing
That
to
makes
think
sense.
about when you've got this medium that exists just so you can kind of like shoot off your mouth in the moment. But I do like there's a sense of community there that I kind of, you know, if I find that appealing. The problem is I also find it all a distraction from writing. And I'm not saying that to sound like some sort of, you know, ridiculous workhorse. I really do need, for it to work for me, I need to stay in the book. I need my subconscious to just stay in the book. And social media for me feels like the enemy of doing that. I think, getting back to the business question you asked, my understanding is that you're probably getting more reach from Facebook, because of the age of the audience at this point. But I say that with absolutely no educated sense of it.
Right.
Do you feel like there's a clear winner?
No, I mean, I would say Facebook and Twitter, and Instagram is, I'm kind of clueless about Instagram because, you can caption all those pictures all you want, but it's still just pictures. And I don't know, I don't know. Like you said, it's completely uneducated. I feel like it's been really beneficial to me between Cemetery Dance and the writing side of things. And I've been very fortunate that I have a really good group of people, who I've gotten to know over that. And, I'm, like I said, I don't get out much. So for me, it's kind of my way of reaching out and hearing back. But yeah, Barbara mentioned that, Facebook, I think people are already leaving in droves. And I think
You guys haven't run across Book Talk so far?
Mm-mm.
No,
Book Talk is an outgrowth of TikTok, and what it
yeah,
is,
I'm seeing
basically
people sell
like
books on it. I probably should.
5 or 6 seconds or some, tiny little videos. And apparently they've been tremendously effective in
Huh.
selling some kinds of books, but I tend to think it must be for a younger audience. I mean, I can't imagine spending my time scrolling through 5-second videos, just for something to do, but maybe that works really well if you're like, commuting, if you're back at the office, in case there are people back at the office, and you're on not driving, but, on a train or some such thing. I mean, the thing that really baffles me about a lot of it is I can't figure out where people get the time in their daily lives to scroll through Twitter or scroll through Book Talk or TikTok or even go to Facebook. I mean,
We should give them a book recommendation while we're sitting here saying we're 3 people who don't understand social media. We do understand books.
Yeah, I was going to say, getting back to where they wait,
yeah.
the opening sentence is I was never a dreamer. And I actually wrote that down a couple days ago. And it made me immediately curious, Michael, how about yourself? I mean, are you a dreamer or do you not remember? Oh, yeah.
Yes. Yep.
Do you
So
remember?
I have never talked to anyone who is not a dreamer, but I have had a conversation with someone who rarely remembers dreams. And I thought that was really unique. And I mean, I remember dreams every night. I don't know. Are you the same way or?
Oh yeah, I dream complete narratives. And I mean, I had the most nonsensical, bizarre dream last night and it, like 3 or 4 unrelated, yet and somehow interconnected different storylines. And I can still remember 2 of them. And I won't even talk about them because Barbara will like shut me right off the podcast probably. But yes, I mean, go on. I know lots of people who say they don't dream. So now you saying that makes me think, are they lying to me? Are they telling me the truth? Because I definitely have a lot of close friends who say, I just don't dream. Or if I do, I don't remember anything.
Interesting. Have you ever gotten an actual story idea, usable material from it?
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
I dreamt, and I'm trying to remember the name of the story. Shoot, it's in one of my recent collections. But I actually dreamt that I was in this person's shoes and I was a woman. I was an older woman and I was walking from across a parking lot and I was walking into a school. And the last line of the story came to me. And as I was pulling something from my purse, and the gun was heavy and it was a school shooting dream. And I was actually the shooter. And I mean, that's where the dream ended. But yeah, I woke up right away and wrote like a little 1,500 word story that freaked me out. And I wrote it as much for the old cliche of getting it out of me. And
Yeah.
I've never dreamt it again. It never came back. But yeah, and several other times. But that was the most chilling one for me because I was the person. I was the bad guy. And
see, I've never gotten anything usable out of it. I've done the like wake up, just like you said, and scribble down. At 3 o'clock in the morning, I always emerge from a dream and think, oh, this is great. And then in the morning, I'm like, no, there's nothing there. So I'm waiting on the good one. I know Lahane had an element of Shutter Island that it came from a dream. And I think Steve's had a few that he worked in.
I know Joe
I'm
Lansdale
waiting on
used to
good
have-
material. So far, I haven't found any.
Joe Lansdale used to have what he called popcorn dreams. And that was back when he was writing all those short stories for like Twilight Zone and Mike Shane's mystery magazines. And they were bizarre, they were like talking dinosaurs and, and not the Ray Bradbury kind,
Okay, so that's the difference between me and Joe. I would say, that's not usable material. Joe's like, of course it is. Let me get that down. It'll be great.
That's when he was writing a story a day. So yeah, I think he used everything, that could, but
there's no such thing as unusable material.
How about nightmares? You have nightmares?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Like the kind that wake you up and you're actually scared
and also the sort of, to me, the more intense nightmares are lucid dreams where you develop that knowledge that you're in the dream. And I'll have like a momentary reassurance of, oh, hang on, this is a dream, but then you go back into it. It's that sort of like rising and falling sense. And one thing I have wanted to do, I just have not been organized enough to do this, having a watch that tracks your heart rate, I think would be really interesting on a nightmare night to look at, is it really spiking? Because I've always had the great question of, could a nightmare kill you? When you die in your sleep, could you could it? And I think as a horror writer, isn't that kind of appealing?
Oh,
the idea of being able to, I mean, you would feel bad a little bit.
A little.
If you could tell a story so terrifying, it actually took somebody out.
I'll spill my guts first, so maybe it'll make it easier for you. But I recently had a bizarre dream where my father, who has been gone for over a decade now, my father and I built some kind of a go-kart out of a stop sign, a bird bath, and a bicycle. And we used it to outrace zombies. And that's a true story. That's a true dream. And this one wasn't a nightmare because it was pretty cool that I was working with my dad. Because if you remember in Chasing the Boogeyman, he always was tinkering in the garage. So it kind of brought a smile to me. But that's a true thing. And I tried to think, what did I eat the night before? Did I have fresh beef or shrimp fried rice or something crazy? No. So do you have anything like that, or yours are more like?
No, actually, the dreams when people you've lost come back, I think are actually treasures, because in that moment they do feel very real, and it's sort of a chance to revisit. And I guess I've had some sort of melancholy dreams along those lines, where it's like you're seeing someone who you're not going to see again, but it's nice to have that little encounter. Recurring dreams, the following dreams I think are pretty common, but one I've been having since I was a kid, I'm probably like 8 or 9 years old. The IU Library in Bloomington, in my hometown, at the time when I was a kid, was a huge building, being all of like 12 stories. It was the massive structure, and the exterior of the building has this kind of like rough limestone. So I think as a kid, I remember looking at it and thinking, I wasn't just impressed by its size, but also there was a sense that it might be climbable, because it's that stage in your life when anything climbable really stands out. And then I loved the inside of the library too. I mean, to go in there and have all of those books as a kid who loved books was obviously exciting. So I would have this dream where I was climbing the outside of that building, and then I would fall. And I've been having that dream my entire life. And I think it's a very nice writer dream to have. You're climbing the library of, stacks of works of people who came before you, and eventually you're going to take a tumble too. So it made too much sense to me, but I kind of like the fact that I've been having this dream for 30 years now.
Yeah, I'm curious what you'll dream tonight. Now that we've
opened, or stay awake. So this morning I was up at 4:30, and maybe it was Hulu suggested The Fog to me, the great John Carpenter night. Yeah, so I was like, I'll put this on for a few minutes and just wait to tune back out. And obviously I had to stay right, until they. Yeah, I was going to say, spoiler, behead the priest, but
you can't fall asleep in the fog. Yeah, I just heard my son pull into the driveway, and it reminded me of his recurring dream from his childhood was a large fish dressed in a tuxedo that was somehow terrifying. And he had he had this dream several times a year, and would just wake up and fly in our bed. And it's yeah, he's never figured out the origin. But I told him,
But
I said,
he is a fisherman though now, right?
yes.
Okay, so
Yeah.
he has the right motivation. Billy,
Oh,
by
I
the
know.
way, I want to compliment. I really liked the book you two wrote together.
Oh,
Widow's
thank you.
Point.
Thank
Really
you.
nice stuff.
Yeah, we
Speaking
had
of
fun.
fog and lighthouse terrors, and
Yeah, we had fun with that. That was the Everything But the Kitchen Sink book. So
it
and now
is fun.
I'm going to use John Carpenter's The Fog as like the perfect segue, because I love stories within stories, and you had a really interesting legend story in the new book, which was the ship Arabella and the Purgatorium and Boone Island. And can you tell us a little bit about that? I mean, I was curious whether any of it came from from true history, or whether this all was for your imagination. But if you can tell the viewers a little bit about it, because I thought it was fascinating, and it was very John Carpenter-ish, The Fog.
Yeah, so Boone Island it's a true story, and a novelist from Maine named Kenneth Roberts, who he won a Pulitzer for I think it was a book about the American Revolution, but he also wrote Boone Island as a novel, but the story is true. So there was a ship that wrecked off the coast of Maine in December, and this was I want to say mid 1600s. I know it predates the Revolution, and they a group of maybe 13, 14, the numbers are accurate, and where they weighed, I don't remember them offhand, but climbed out onto this rock. And it is, to call it an island is too grandiose. There is nothing there. You can picture those coastal islands in Maine.
Right.
And they survived for weeks. And they famously ended up eating a couple of their companions, very Donner Party-esque. But one of the things there were a couple of things that stood out to me about that book. And one of the most haunting images was, he writes about, there's a church the island is only a few miles offshore, but they can't make a fire and they have no way of signaling. And so they could watch on Sundays. They knew that there were people there because they could watch them walk to this church. Oh. And the idea of surviving, that it is even possible to survive after being in the North Atlantic and not being able to start a fire, to survive for days and weeks as they did in December, is just kind of a staggering story. So that is all true. And then I worked in some really brutal history about the forced exodus of the Acadians, where these people were rounded up and taken to the Carolinas, Maryland, Virginia, and then down to Louisiana. You still have the Cajun culture in some respects still comes from the Acadian people who were forced from their homeland. And we had it was Governor Shirley of Massachusetts, who was one of the supervising politicians of that little enterprise. And there was a ship where they were sick and they were forced to overwinter at anchor because no one in the colonies wanted the sick brought in, to their communities. So all of that was taken from actual history. And I tried to weave a legend that picked up a little bit of both. I think if you really look at the underpinnings, you can see that I tacked Boone Island on. I don't really need Boone Island. I have enough with the Arabella and the Acadians, but I love that Boone Island story so much that I just had to put it in there.
See, I would never, as a reader, and especially as a writer, I would never say that out loud, because I'm like, no, to me, it was integral to the story, Michael, and I needed it, and it was completely successful. And don't let your editor tell you otherwise next time.
All right. Well, I appreciate hearing that.
Yeah, no, that's one of the things I love about King's work, and some other authors too, and particularly,
he was the one guy. He's the one reader who chimed in and let me know that he appreciated seeing Boone Island in there. And that he remembered the book. And so the book probably came out in I want to say the early 50s, but he had a very vivid memory of reading it when he was a kid, the Kenneth Roberts book.
Right. Well, as soon as you mentioned that, you thank Roberts in your acknowledgments, don't you?
Possibly. Yeah.
I think so. Yeah. Cause that makes me want to go do
Boone. Yeah. My dad gave me the book, Boone Island. So I
Okay.
thank my dad for giving me that
That's
book.
it. Right.
And then there was also a book called Moonfleet. I don't know if you ever read that.
I have not.
Jamie Faulkner, kind of a Treasure Island sort of vibe, but I would argue, I actually, in some ways, better writing. So it was a nod to those kind of like, classic seafaring legends. I love that stuff.
Yeah, I do too. And like I said, it fits seamlessly in your story. So I really enjoyed that.
I did too. Let me ask you something, Richard, going back to something you said. Do you think that the scariest nightmares are the ones that arise from kind of everyday things, doing things you don't want them to do or don't expect, rather than, some completely contrived or out of this world substance? I mean, I wonder if we're more frightened in our dreams by things in our life, that rise up to bite us. Well, like clarity, like an app, rather than some Frankenstein, knocking at the window.
Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting question. Personally, most of my nightmares, the ones that I can truly remember in vivid detail, and the ones that my wife has to roll over and wake me up from because she says I'm almost hyperventilating, have to do with home invasions, and not always by humans, I don't think, but mostly. But it's the moments that I remember in my nightmares are that almost that cliched horror movie moment where you're reaching out into the darkness and that you're terrified that hand is going to grab your wrist or is going to grab the back of your shoulder, and then it happens. But you have to keep going forward because you're protecting your family or you're protecting your children or your wife. And a lot of my dreams involve, reaching out into the darkness from around a corner, trying to find safe passage, and then finding out it's not there. And that's my jolt awake. When she finally wake, she says that, I'm making these hyperventilating sounds. So that's me personally. I know I've been asked a lot because it's October and it's Halloween, what scares me? And my answer for my waking hours is always just the pretty, standard, because I'm not scared of vampires or zombies in real life. So I'm scared of, something happened to loved ones and that kind of thing. But I don't have those kind of slow burning dreams where, I'm frightened because a loved one is in a hospital bed. It's always the things that go bump in the dark and then grab me.
The acute visceral threat.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I've always been that way. I've always been, I've said this a lot this month too. I've always been a believer, I've always believed in the boogeyman and Bigfoot and aliens and all of that. So I'm like prime, I'm like a prime target.
You are so teed up
for people like you, Michael. I'm easy, an easy target. And you know what? That's probably why I'm still doing this nonsense after 30 something years,
There you go.
Because I am a believer. So I've used it to my benefit, but
paranoia that pays off.
Yeah, absolutely. So what's next for Scott Carson? Do you know?
I do. Yeah. You
don't have to tell specifics.
It's going to be the first book I've said in my hometown. Ooh. So I was very interested talking to you about Chasing the Boogeyman because, you went and lived there, and I've never written about Bloomington, and I wanted to go back and do it, but I had expected to do sort of a fictional stand-in. It just seemed the Castle Rock or the Dairy, and I feel like the book really demands hitting all of the real places, not the stand-in that is people in the know will say like, oh, he's talking about this restaurant or this street or that park. I really want to hit the locations as they were. So it's going to be a book set in 1999 in Bloomington. So that's when I was 16, 17. And I started an internship with a private investigator.
Oh, wow.
I've obviously written about the PI world, but I've never written from that point of view that I had of being like, the young kid doing the internship in this kind of bizarre profession, but in the warm confines of your hometown.
Oh, wait, is that a Scott Carson book or is that going to be a Michael Carita book?
Excellent question. That's Scott Carson. So,
okay. So something weird is going to happen in Bloomington.
Yes, something very weird will happen in Bloomington.
Okay, but what about as Michael Carita?
As Carita, I have one hopefully next summer called An Honest Man. And it's a nice opens with a nice cheerful scene where we have a luxury yacht drifting off the coast of Maine, and an innocent lobsterman goes out there to see what's amiss and finds 7 butchered bodies.
Oh,
And obviously he cannot be a suspect in this case, one would think, but he's in for some trouble.
oh no. I love
This
it.
is so Ruth Rendell. Ruth Rendell wrote really killer crime novels as Ruth Rendell. And then she wrote as Barbara Vines, some very imaginative, occasionally supernatural kinds of stories. So you're really very much in that same pattern that Ruth had. And, it was great because readers never seem to have any trouble with it. They
No,
just
and it's
read one name or the other, or often would read both. Part of it was because
Right.
she's such a wonderful stylist, and so are you.
Thank
And I think that readers, if they like your voice and like your style, will follow you from one to another. I didn't see any point in keeping Scott Carson a secret because you're so popular with all of us as Michael Carita. I felt that, people would follow you to Scott Carson, knowing you were Michael
I
Carita.
was apparently the only one who saw a point in keeping Scott Carson secret. I was literally the only one within the business to whom it made any sense. And I guess it didn't necessarily make business sense. I liked the idea of trying to string it out as long as I could.
What, so you wanted to be J.K. Rowling, really writing as,
Absolutely.
as
Yeah.
Robert Galbraith, and then, one day your agent or your lawyer will.
My
Yeah.
hope was that I could get at least several books down the line without, being caught. But this is more fun. At least I can talk about the books now.
I went about a week before I found out who it was.
There
So
you go.
it worked for a while, but so here's a tricky question, which you were refused to answer honestly, probably. But any thoughts of doing another pseudonym and keeping that one a secret?
Oh, definitely. Absolutely. The first thought that I had when, Scott Carson was compromised was, let's come up with another identity here. So.
Right. Yeah, and it'd be much easier to do now too, because
Exactly. People would think, no, it can't be him. He's already got the other names.
how much can he write? And he would never do that now.
And
Exactly.
it's a trinity. I mean, how scary is that, Michael? Taking out of the religious
Talking about
significance
pseudonyms,
here.
Barbara,
Michael
while I
Carita,
have you.
head of the trinity.
Do you know who Boston Turan is?
Patrick may. We'll ask Patrick when he comes on.
Okay.
I did, interestingly enough, at 1:00 this afternoon, I did a Zoom program with a woman who has a pseudonym. And, we talked about it. Why did she decide to write under this new name? And it was really basically a marketing decision. She'd written some other kinds of books, and now she was going to start a new series. And her publisher felt that, to have a new name, especially one with a British overtone, because it's in the cozy historical vein, would make sense. And if one of my favorite people of all time and authors, Elizabeth Peters, her real name was Barbara Mertz, and she wrote her wonderful Amelia Peabody books as Elizabeth Peters, but she too wrote some supernatural, not horror, but more ghost stories and stuff, more romantic ghost stories as, God, what was her other name? It'll come to me in a minute. Sorry, I'm blanking out. Barbara Michaels. So, it was difficult when you see her, you never were sure whether she was Barbara, whether she was Elizabeth, whatever. And one day, I love this story. It's one of my favorite stories. We were friends. And so we were standing together talking at a Seattle BoucherCon, and some fan came rushing up, and, she turned to smile and, was going to do the author thing. And the fan rushed up to me and said, "I just love your book," she said. Amelia Peabody is so great because, as Barbara Peters, she couldn't quite figure it all out. And so I thought, well, okay. So I said, "I'm so glad you liked them." I said, "Which is your favorite?" I could hear Barbara Elizabeth over here making sort of tea kettle sounds, like she was getting more and more pissed. And anyway, after a bit, she stepped forward and she said, "We've not met." She said, "I'm Barbara Peters and I have a great bookstore in Scottsdale, Arizona."
That's great. That's
Turn about fair play, yes.
Well, because the names were so close.
Right.
Barbara Mertz, Barbara Michaels, Elizabeth, it was easier to get them confused. So I think you've done well to have Michael Carita and Scott Carson. There's no real likelihood of, because
So
of the
a
same
dream
name.
that I have that my wife hasn't officially signed off on yet is I want a double-sided tombstone.
Oh, geez.
So you'd have Carita on one side and Carson on the other. I think it would be great for the fans and would really confuse the hell out of anyone just walking through the cemetery.
Certainly
She takes
would.
cemeteries with a much more sacred quality than I do, apparently, but I'm still
But,
working on that.
there's a
confirmation.
long tradition of this. Donald Westlake as Richard Stark.
Oh, yeah.
Patrick's
Right,
recently been asking people, do they really like the Richard Stark? But Lawrence Block, I mean, we didn't know, he had pseudonyms all over the place, some of them women, when he was writing, guys who
Koontz
wrote
had
a
about
lot of
7 names, I think.
Hmm?
Dean Koontz has had about 7.
Yeah.
Yeah. And a lot of it depends on, the publishing media. I mean, when Block was writing for various pulp magazines or, magazines don't necessarily have to be pulp, it would make sense. I'm trying to remember who it was. That was an incredibly prolific writer, might have been Block, but I can't remember who, and was forced to adopt pseudonyms because nobody would believe that the work could be any good if it was the same person writing, publishing like a story a week. I don't remember who that was, but so that was a practical decision just to inspire more reader confidence that, it wasn't one guy churning out stuff literally like once a week.
Right.
So
Well, I'm not that prolific, but we'll work on the 3rd name, though.
I love it. So Patrick, why don't you come and join us and contribute to this discussion? You probably remember all the names I've been batting around here and forgetting.
I want to know about Boston Turan, too. He's the one I'm not sure of. I have ideas.
You have ideas? I'm not sure either. I mean, it's been pretty closely guarded.
Is he actually one guy?
Well, that's an interesting question. I don't know.
You read about the woman who was recently outed as being written by 3, I think it's a woman written by 3 different men.
Right, who won the prize. And then they showed up to collect. Yeah, and it was one of the more prestigious literary prizes in Spain, right?
I think so. Yeah. I mean, and there's sort of a general feeling of like cheat or outrage or something, and I think it's more gender related than multiple author related. But there are certainly
that is something
people who've adopted a gender neutral name or an opposite sex name to, for marketing.
Or initials. I wanted it because of that. I wanted to find about the safest white male name that I could, and Scott Carson with 1 T or 2 was the debate, but I understand people getting upset about that sort of thing, so I wanted to make sure that I avoided that.
1 T would have been a little too exotic,
a little too British.
Yeah, I think so. But by the way, I'd like to cast an early vote that Scott Carson does a big sprawling haunted house novel at some point.
Okay, excellent.
Yeah, I think that'd be a good place to go.
It's one thing neither he or Carita have attempted yet, and need to. One of these guys at some point.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm sure you could find an appropriate house somewhere in Maine.
There are a few, yes.
What would be actually really cool would be to have in addition to the tombstone, which is a great idea, is to have like the ace double, one side Carita, one side Carson. That would be really cool. Yeah.
That would be a neat specialty press book,
Yeah, totally.
Almost like an oddity, do a novella from each.
Turn it upside down and.
Right. So what can Carson do above and beyond? Is it just supernatural element that Carson can do that Carita can't do? Where's the point of demarcation between those two parts of your psyche?
It's a very good question. And I feel like Scott's going to want to go off and try something that makes this whole thing. I'll lose it's supernatural, I'm going to lose that clear point of marketing, because at some point Scott Carson's going to want to write a book that doesn't, that is off brand for Scott Carson. So right now I'm trying to keep the tight reins on him with supernatural horror. That's what he does. But I don't know too many writers. I mean, Rich, you tell me, are there many writers who stay on brand successfully without wandering away at some point?
No, not many.
Yeah. So just because this guy's made up, why would we expect him to be any better behaved. I don't know.
You know who is a writer I'm sure both of you guys admire a lot is Dan Simmons. And we haven't heard much from him in recent years, have we?
No.
I think he has had some health issues, Patrick.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, I think he's a wonderful guy. He came to the store many times and,
Yeah.
you know, a really interesting writer, tries all different kinds of things, science fiction and mystery and, you know, other stuff.
I love The Terror.
Historical fiction. Yeah, no, I mean,
Summer
I
of
think he's a
Night.
terrific writer.
Summer Night's one of my favorites.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I know he was building. We were friends on Facebook, so I know he was building a house out, you know, up in the mountains somewhere, and he was showing frequent, you know, updated photos of that. But that I'm thinking that was more, you know, probably about a year ago. So yeah, I'm not sure, but you're right. We haven't heard much from him.
Well, maybe he just took a writing break in order to have a construction, you know, operation going. Who knows?
He was doing such research intensive work with The Terror. There was the Everest book, The Abominable,
Abominable, yeah.
Black Hills. So he was doing some, you know, research heavy stuff, but
Brood.
yes.
True, yeah.
There's another one. Let's see. There is a question here. Okay, Kurt asks, he says, I recently came across some advice that said you need a good 5+ books in some state of completion before you even try to become a professional author. What reserves did each of you have prior to starting your career? If you didn't start with a trove, how did you manage to gain so much momentum that you're now writing enough for 2 people?
I had never heard the 5 books. That's interesting. But it's oddly on point. So my first published book was the 4th one I wrote. Now, the other 3 have never seen the light of day, never will. I guess I would say, though, the professional writer is, you're always throwing that stuff out there and trying to sell it. I don't know too many people who are sitting on manuscripts without at least trying. I mean, Rich, did you earn some rejection slips first?
Oh yeah, I mean, I was all short stories. So, you know, when I was in college and through those early years of Cemetery Dance, so lots and lots of rejections, and it was a different world then. You know, so many small press and semi-pro magazines, you know, existed back then that you know are long gone. So yeah, those rejections came in fast and furious. Unfortunately, some acceptances did, and you know, that's kind of how I caught the bug. But you probably wrote those 3 books of yours when you were like 18 is what I'm thinking.
Or younger.
Yep, 16, 17, 18, and then
Exactly.
when I wrote at 19 is the one that sold. That's Tonight I
And he was full of life experience and was,
Yeah.
and, you know, could really do a great job. Richard, why did the short story, you know, as a form, why was the short story so interesting to you?
Mainly because that's what, other than Stephen King, and I grew up in a big family of readers, the youngest of 5, and both my parents were big readers. But once I got into the horror genre, it was mainly the shorter form that I was exposed to, other than Stephen King. It was a lot of anthologies. It was a lot of magazines. You know, I was subscribed to the Twilight Zone magazine, and then I discovered the Horror Show magazine and Night Cry and that type of thing. And plus, also, I did not have. You know, my youngest son's 22. He completed a novel. I've read it, you know, I'm in the middle of the second read, and I just shake my head because, very much like you, Michael, you know, the fact that he could weave an entire narrative at an early age like that I couldn't do that. So yeah, short stories were my cop out and also my first love, but it wasn't until much later I could put something together that was sustained and of more length.
Don't ghost stories have a kind of tradition of short stories? I mean, M.R. James and people like that. Is the shorter form make a ghost story work better, more believable?
You know, that's a good point. I think, yeah, I think maybe it does. I just know, you know, you mentioned the pulps earlier, and a lot of those writers, that's who they wrote for. Well, they wrote for the Slicks and the pulps. Sometimes under various names, but I'm thinking of people like Hugh Cave and Robert Bloch and those guys. There's so many markets for them to submit to. So I think they, in some cases, the form, you know, was just what was available. Other times, like you said, the supernatural, it might be easier to sustain that believability for 20 manuscript pages as opposed to 250.
Right. And you know, the era of magazines was a golden age for short story writers.
Right.
You know,
Yeah.
I mean, we can go all the way back to Conan Doyle. Without the Stratton magazine, where would Sherlock Holmes actually be? Right.
That's
And even
exactly right.
you know, those 19th century guys, they published their novels in serial form. You know, it didn't come out as a whole book. It came out in serial form, and you know, and eventually emerged as a book. So it's interesting that the publishing medium probably has had a really serious effect on what people choose to write. You know, what you can get published in would you know, determine what you write.
That's
Yeah.
interesting. And then people like Michael came along and just wrote full-length novels right from the start before they were old enough to drive.
Cheaters. Cheaters.
Now, how old were you again when you sold your first book?
19,
19.
Wow. And how old when it was published?
21.
I remember it well. Yep. I have grandchildren older than Michael when he published his first book. Lord.
He could order a legal drink to celebrate the first book.
I know.
I barely could. Yes.
Yeah, no, that's amazing and admirable as hell. When I was 21, I was writing ridiculous stories that, you know, about like monsters that crawled out of, you know, beer bottles and killed abusive husbands and, you know, pretty much comic book stories. So there you go.
Anything else?
I think that's probably one of the reasons I talked earlier about how it took me a long time to even think about writing from the point of view of the 16-year-old intern at the detective agency, which seems like such natural material, right? Like, why not call that up? But at the time, I was trying so hard to learn how to write seriously from the point of view of someone much older and much more experienced, that the idea of going backwards, I think it takes a little while. And, you know, now I'll turn 40 next year. So it seems right. It's my midlife crisis book to return to 16 and, you know, try it from that point of view.
40 is too young to have a midlife crisis, Michael. Trust me. You need to be.
Maybe not when you
before
started.
get there.
Maybe not when you sold your first book at 19. He's ahead of the curve.
Way ahead. That's true.
Has either of you written for young readers or attempted that?
No, and it's something I've been thinking about just in the last couple of weeks. One of my favorite writers, when I was a kid, but favorite writers period, Gary Paulsen, who wrote Hatchet and Dog
Right.
Song. I mean, I think he wrote over 200 books, but he just passed away. And I was going back and listening to some interviews he did with Terry Gross, some Fresh Air interviews, and he had a brutal childhood. A memoir that just came out this year captures a little bit of that, but there was something about his death that made me think I'd like to try it. You know, you need the story. You need the one that says it's for this audience. It's not just being force fed, but I would like to try it.
Yeah, and I have not. I mean, I think the closest I've come might be, you know, Gwendy's Button Box, because in many ways it's a very innocent story told about a coming of age story for a young girl. And I've always described it as kind of a dark fairy tale in a lot of ways. So yeah, no, but I'd like to. I'd love to be one of those guys who had, like, you know, a young readers series that you could knock out, because, you know, a lot of those books are shorter in length, I believe. So it'd be nice to put, you know, to churn out a 40,000 word little book a year and have it come out and get a new audience.
The end.
Yeah, it'd be fun.
You mentioned Joe Lansdale earlier. You know, he does an awful lot of younger protagonists and a lot of coming of age stories, I suppose. Some of which are probably too dark for a young reader, but yeah, he does it all.
Oh, he does. Yeah, he reminds me of even more so of the old writer Ed Gorman, who did a little bit of everything.
Yeah. Right.
And, yeah, I know they both came up around the same time, and it makes me miss the old Mystery Scene magazines.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, definitely.
Anything else, Patrick?
There's somebody that's asking, and Barbara, you probably know the answer to this. Does anyone know Alex Finley's real name? His first book was Every Last Fear.
No, he has another book coming out, but I don't. It took me forever to smoke out. I'm trying to think. what her name is it Ada Moncrief was truly, we went back and it was the guy that wrote the 13th tale. I'm sorry, I'm not at my best tonight, but anyway, usually I find out, it just sometimes takes a while, but you know, the J.K. Rowling thing was really unusual, that somebody that famous could have kept a second identity secret for so long, and then it was so stupid the way that it was leaked, you know.
I still have a galley of that book that was sent to me for a blurb, and I didn't get to the book. And so I missed my chance to blurb J.K. Rowling. That would have been a very, it makes you look twice at every debut that comes in, you know, who is this really?
We didn't miss it. I actually was able to get autographed copies from the British publisher because I wrote a fan letter to the British publisher after the American publisher said that your publisher, in fact, had no idea who it was. And I said, then you won't care if I try for British copies. He said no. So I did. And my understanding is that she agreed to sign our books, which turned out to be basically valuable, but we didn't know that because it was a pure fan letter. It wasn't influenced what you've had to say. You know, you wanted somebody to love it, not because of who you are, but because of the work. So we actually sold 100 signed copies of the first
Wow.
ever Galbraith.
I bet those do pretty well at auction right now.
I don't have any idea. I wish I'd hold on to some of them, but the thing is that we had some left, and that announcement came on, and before any of us could breathe, they were snapped up. You know, I mean, it was we didn't have a preview announcement, which might have allowed us to, you know, hide a couple, but it didn't work out that way. So anyway, I've always been pleased that you know, that we had that experience. It was great.
Oh, definitely.
That's about it as far as questions.
All right, I have one final one for Richard. Now that you have published Chasing the Boogeyman, a successful novel on the New York Times bestseller list, what are you doing next?
I'm hoping to do a sequel, actually, which my agent and publisher are both excited about, but also a little trepidation. You know, they're a little bit worried, you know, the old sequel disappointment kind of thing. And they don't want to feel like, you know, I know the publisher doesn't want to feel like they're cashing in on the, you know, the quick success of the first book, but
Why not?
I don't know. I was out.
They're a commercial operation. Why wouldn't they want to cash in?
Right. Exactly. That's what I kept saying. I was like, do you have any doubts that I can do this? And they're like, no. So I was out working in the yard last week or 2 weeks ago, and I had, with no intentions of trying to think of this, I had the first chapter of a sequel come to me with a real gut punch of an ending to that first chapter. And I just thought, you know what, I need to write that, and it needs to go in the back of the trade paperback of Boogeyman, which comes out in July. And I said, I think it would excite people. And so I called up my agent, and we're working on that. So hopefully that's what's next after Gwendy's final task in February. And I still plan on asking Steve if he'll come on here with me.
Okay, I think that would be wonderful. I'm really excited for you. You know, I mean, how wonderful that you've written for so long, and then all of a sudden, isn't it interesting how that can go, Michael, with, you know, and Richard both, with writers, that you can, something comes along and suddenly.
I'm looking at my Ray Bradbury quote right now that says, read every day and write every day and see what happens. Most writers I know who've been put on that diet have very successful careers.
That's
And
awesome.
I think Rich is a perfect example of that.
Well, it takes persistence and it takes talent, but it also, there's a certain amount of luck. You know, if you write the right book for the right moment, which you can't ever know when you're writing it, because the right moment's going to be too far out in front of you, right?
Right.
Absolutely. I still remember telling my son when he was worried about me trying to pass off Chasing the Boogeyman as a true story. And I remember telling him, we don't even know if this will get published, or, you know, 50 people will read it, or 50,000, who knows? And yeah, I mean, you know, in my case, it turned out really well. Like I said, I'm grateful and excited about what's next.
Well, that's wonderful. I'm so pleased. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. Michael, dear, it's always a pleasure.
Thank
We're
you.
going to get
As
to see
always,
you again
Rich, thank
before
you very
next
much.
summer.
Thank you, guys. Thank you very much.
Michael, you didn't answer my question.
Oh, pardon me?
Are we going to get to see you in some form before next summer? Is there
I
something
certainly
coming
hope so.
along that I don't know about?
It's It's not hard to get me to Arizona in the winter, so that'll be a pretty easy sell.
Oh, wonderful. Michael, I have to add, was one of our early writers in residence and was here, in fact. Which was the book that you conceived and worked on while you were here?
Well, I was working on the screenplay for Those Who Wish Me Dad, which one version of the many screenplays for Those Who Wish Me Dad was conceived there.
Right. So anyway, it's been a lot of fun to spend time with Michael, and it's been wonderful to get to know Richard, which I have to thank Michael for, because we did that. When was it? August, wasn't it?
August, yes.
It was, right. So, one of the great things about doing this is that you get to meet people that you never thought you'd actually get to talk to or meet. It's been wonderful. Anyway, thanks very much, guys. We appreciate all of you who watched it tonight. The video is going to stay on YouTube and on Facebook, and there will be a podcast available. So if you know anybody who wishes they had been here but missed it, they don't need to miss it. They can catch up. Right. So once again, here we go. And I will mention it is our October crime book of the month, but we've sold out of autographed copies, proving that you should join our book of the month club, and then you won't be deprived of an autographed copy. But in any case, it's a wonderful book, and
It really is.
And thank you, Michael, for it. Perfect for October. I thought the timing was superb and undoubtedly intentional.
Very much so. So thank you for recognizing it.
Right. Okay. Good night.
Take care.
Thank you.
Be well. Be safe.
Hello. We hope you're enjoying our programs and podcasts with authors. We'd like to expand them, and your help would be appreciated. Please make a donation at poisonedpenfoundation.org. 100% of the proceeds will go to help connect authors with readers in this difficult time. Thank you.